The recent past, the present, and the future, it's absolutely stacked at the tight end position for Oregon. Will the Ducks offense be better in 2025 than it was in 2024? This is That Show Out West. Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. I'm Ted LeBrew. We've got some very exciting shows coming up in the future. We are going to be bringing on some guests here as we get closer to spring practice to dive into a variety of Oregon Ducks topics. So you can mark that on your calendar in the coming weeks. Going to be bringing on some really good guests here onto this show. Now, before we get in our covered wagons and take a trip on the Oregon recruiting trail, I want to first mention some other news. That's George Silva, who will soon be a former Oregon Duck offensive tackle because he intends to enter the transfer portal coming up. And look, he was a top-ranked JUCO player in the class of 2023, but when you continue to bring in the great talent that the Ducks are doing on the offensive line, sometimes guys like this, even as highly rated as someone like Silva was, sometimes they're going to get buried on the depth chart when you bring in the talent that the Oregon Ducks certainly do. Like you brought in two transfer offensive tackles in Alex Harkey and Isaiah World. You got a great true freshman that a lot of people are excited about in Zaire Anderson coming in. Silva played in 13 games over the past two seasons. So we certainly wish George well. This will be his last season of eligibility wherever he decides to go. All right, folks, now it is time to get into your covered wagons and end up in Oregon City because it is time to go on the Oregon recruiting trail. Some recruiting headlines to really kick this thing off here on That Show Out West. The first thing that we want to talk about is a quarterback commitment, maybe soon to be a flip from Oregon to another West Coast program. So let's talk about Jonas Williams a little bit. Now, in the last edition of TSOW, I played the clip of On3's Steve Wiltfong talking about how Oregon was the leader for the number one quarterback in the country out of Nashville, Tennessee, Mr. Jared Curtis. And when I followed up that video clip, I said, considering that Dante Moore is probably going to be on campus for 2 years, and then you've got Achilles Smith Jr. as a true freshman here in the 25 cycle, who was a high four-star type of talent, it was very unlikely to me that you would see both Jonas Williams and Jared Curtis possibly be Oregon Ducks next season. And, a week, less than a week maybe, I'm not sure exactly how long it was, after that news came out that, hey, it looks like Oregon is leading the way and setting the pace for the recruitment of top quarterback Jared Curtis. Now you have Chad Simmons, now you have Steve Wiltfong at On3 predicting that Jonas Williams will flip from Oregon over to USC. Now, if that is indeed the case, and if that deal is indeed going to be closed for Lincoln Riley and USC, another deal needs to be closed for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. They need to close the deal for Jared Curtis. They need to close the deal if this is indeed the case. And like I said, they are leading. They are setting the pace. Steve Wiltfong said maybe this commitment could happen sooner rather than later. I believe Jared is visiting sometime in June to Eugene, Oregon. It was humorous, maybe I should say, to see the reaction of USC fans and saying, hey, we got a guy to flip from Oregon over to USC without maybe knowing what was going on with the recruitment of Jared Curtis. You tie it all together, it makes sense, and I think it's really good for both parties in Los Angeles and, of course, up here in Eugene, Oregon as well. Now, for the quarterback position, let's head over to the wide receiver position. Things are getting very interesting with the 2026 class as it pertains to the wide receiver position. First, let's talk about Ethan Booby Feaster. He was the top receiver in the 2027 class, but now he is reclassifying to the 2026 class. Booby Feaster out of DeSoto, Texas. And when kind of listening to some of the reports from On3 and that same Steve Wiltfong show that I got some of the Jared Curtis information from as well, it sounds like NIL is going to be a top priority. It's going to be a big priority. He wants to certainly take care of his family. And we know Oregon can certainly throw out the bucks. We know Oregon certainly has one of the very top NIL programs in all of college football. So you've got to feel really good if you're a Duck fan in terms of the recruitment of Booby Feaster going forward. You know, when I look at him, there's a lot of Ryan Williams. Not only in his desire and eventually what he's going to do in reclassifying a class up, but I just look at his tape and it just everything seems a lot like Ryan Williams, and I think he could maybe have a potential impact, possibly like Ryan Williams. He was a max prep freshman and sophomore All-American in 2023. 32 catches, 634 yards, and 9 touchdowns as a freshman on DeSoto's 6A D2 championship team. In 2024, 57 catches, 824 yards, and 13 touchdowns. When you can have those types of numbers as a freshman playing high school football in the state of Texas, yeah, you know you're playing football pretty darn good. Sticking with the wide receiver position, Caden Dixon Wyatt has scheduled his visit for Oregon and a handful of other schools. Caden Dixon Wyatt, a 4-star recruit out of Mater Dei. We've talked about that pipeline. This will not be the last time on this very program, on this edition of TSOW, that we will talk about that pipeline to Santa Ana, California. But he is visiting Oregon on June 20th. Oregon will be the last visit on KD Dub's list. Alabama, Ohio State, USC, and Texas. So Oregon is certainly going to be battling some big-time powers as well. So I wanted to make sure to throw out those pieces of news because it really leads into a very interesting and very intriguing strategy of what Dan Lanning and company are going to do with the wide receiver position in the 26 class. Now, they took 2 wide receivers in the 25 cycle. Of course, the number 1 wide receiver in Dacorian Moore and the 4-star Cooper Perry out of the state of Arizona. So where does that leave things for the 2026 class? You know, you're probably going to lose Evan Stewart next season, but there is a good amount of young wide receivers on this team possibly going forward. Don't forget, when you look at 2026, because you're going to look at Chris Henry Jr. certainly as well. He's committed to Ohio State, and now we got a new wide receivers coach and now passing game coordinator. That was made official by Oregon with Ross Douglas coming in. So how he is going to approach this in terms of what his recruiting ability is going to be, combined with Rashad Samples. Really excited about the Texas connection between Rashad Samples and possibly Booby Feaster certainly as well. But here's one thing to keep in mind for the 2026 wide receiver class. A 5-star by the name of Gatlin Bear. Gatlin Bear was actually a class of 2024 guy, but a 5-star, taller receiver, really good. Oregon fans very excited about him, but he took a 2-year Mormon mission, and he is going to be joining the Ducks next season. So how does that kind of affect the number of receivers, of high school seniors, that they are going to take at this position in 2026? That's certainly something to keep an eye on. Staying on offense, a lot of skill positions on offense and recruiting talk here today. How about the running back position? Oregon has made the top 6, the final 6 for 4-star running back Deshaun Rideau. He is out of Oaks Christian in California. 5'10", 195 pounds. He's a smaller back, but shiftier. That one cut, certainly explosive ability. And we talk about wide receiver and how that position is shaping up in the future for the Ducks. Running back is also a position that's very interesting because you're probably going to lose Mekhi Hughes after 1 year. You're going to lose Noah Whittington. So you lose your top two backs. I think one storyline to really keep in your head here as we look forward to the 2025 spring and eventually the 2025 fall camp and eventually the 2025 season is who's going to set themselves up to possibly be the guy to take over as RB1 in 2026? I talked about how much that I love Dejon Riggs, but you look, Oregon took two running backs in the 2025 class. You took a Matter Day kid in Jordan Davison. You took De'Aaron Hill, a really explosive running back out of the state of Illinois. And then we mentioned a 2026 here with Rideau. They already have a running back and weapon in Tredarian Ball that is committed in that class. So they're clearly loading up, or at least attempting to load up at the running back position in there as well. Going to be really interesting to see how those two skill positions play out as this summer goes by, as more kids commit before their senior year of high school. Last recruiting note that I want to talk about today is our guy, Tony Tuioti. The defensive line coach is currently the number one recruiter, according to 24/7 Sports, for the 2026 class. He's got 4 defensive line commitments as it stands right now. And not only does he have the verbal commitments, he has the commitments to the Pacific Northwest. He has the commitments to the city of Eugene. How about Tony Cumberland and Valami Maloa both have transferred up to local Willamette High School in Eugene. You got Cumberland, you've got Bat Mulatalo, sorry if I pronounce some of these names incorrectly, Tomahini Tupoi, all of those guys, top 150 players in the 2026 cycle. Chris Hampton, the defensive backs coach, brought in a haul this last season and was the 2025 recruiter of the year. Could we go back to back with the Ducks? We know a couple of years ago, Aiden Breland, they got him in that class. You got Elijah Rushing in that class, right? So this has been a guy in Tony Tuioti, and this has been a staff on the defense that has been known and that has been really good at getting top-tier defensive line talent. It appears that is also happening in 2026, and we've heard from the staff as well. You can build a national championship level football team with the kids on the West Coast and in the western portion of the United States. All of these defensive lineman commits are West Coast guys. It seems like Dan Lanning and this Oregon team and this Oregon program right now continues to pave a lot of new paths. One might say they continue to blaze a lot of new trails in Eugene, Oregon right now, and they seem to be accomplishing a lot of best evers, whether it's on the field, whether it's recruiting classes as well. But there's one position group that at Oregon is certainly taking a step up and a jump up into an elite level status in college football, and man, that is the tight end position. The past, the recent past, the present, and the future is absolutely stacked at the tight end position for the Oregon Ducks. Now, before you talk about the present, that being the upcoming 2025 season, before you talk about the future, you got to talk about the groundwork that was laid the last handful of seasons by one of the best, going to go down as one of the all-time best Oregon tight ends in history, that being our boy T-Ferg, that being Terrance Ferguson. When you look at his numbers and how he stacks up, and when you look at Oregon tight ends of the past, to me, I think the battle for the best Oregon tight end of all time is between him and Ed Dixon, who played in the late 2000s for this Oregon football program. Terrance Ferguson, the all-time leader in receptions from a tight end with 134. He is also the career leader in receiving touchdowns from a tight end with 16. He's tied for first with Ed Dixon himself for single-season receptions. Actually, the interesting thing about that is Ed Dixon and Terrance Ferguson are both 1-2, so they both have 2 seasons that are right there, that those offenses in those 2 separate eras really look to get those guys the football. So 42 catches one year for both of these guys, 43 catches another year for both of these guys as well. Fergie, second in single-season receiving yards. He had 591 yards this past season. Second in career receiving yards. That's actually just 20 yards just a measly 20 yards behind Ed Dickson. Terrance Ferguson is a prime example of Duck development. He came in as a Mario Cristobal recruit. He stayed when Dan Lanning became the head coach, and I'm sure he knows that that is an extremely smart decision. And the thing I like about Terrance is it's kind of this newer wave, more athletic, certainly type of tight end that you're seeing a lot more in college football. And because of that you're seeing a lot more in the National Football League as well. You saw Terrance Ferguson line up in the slot. You saw him really work the middle of the field. You saw him maybe do more than your traditional tight end type of position, 3-point stance right next to the offensive tackle. But I talked about at the beginning of the segment, Terrance Ferguson is laying the groundwork. And for as much more and as maybe more diverse that Terrance Ferguson was to maybe other tight ends in the past, not only in Oregon history, but in all of college football, the Ducks are taking it to another level this year with one Kenyon Sadiq. I've talked about on this show how much I love Kenyon Sadiq and how good that I believe Kenyon Sadiq is going to be this season for the Oregon Ducks. But you don't have to take my word for it. Pro Football Focus has a similar type of feeling. They recently came out with the top rated tight ends going into the 2025 season. They had Kenyon Sadiq at number 6. And considering who was above him on that list, I actually thought Kenyon was a little bit underrated. Can you tell that I'm excited about 18 in green and yellow? He had an 80.9 Pro Football Focus grade, which is ranked 9th amongst tight ends. That was last season when he was the backup to Terrance Ferguson. And I've raved about the athleticism. I've raved about the speed compared to maybe who he's lined up against and the matchups that they're lined up against and the versatility that Kenyon Sadiq has at this position. And I'm going to continue to rave about that. But why he is maybe the ultimate combination at the tight end position is that, of course, combined with his ability as a run blocker. Sometimes when you get a tight end that's ultra athletic and is a lot more involved in the passing game and he's quick and he can be very versatile and very diverse in an offense, a lot of times they're not the best blockers in the world. That's not the case with Kenyon. It's not the case with Kenyon Sadiq. He was one of 2 tight ends that earned a top 15 grade from PFF as a receiver and a run blocker as well. So he's really the complete package. And I think what you saw with Terrance Ferguson, the versatility and the diversity, I think you're going to see just a little bit more. And we've seen it. We've seen him involved in the run game. We've seen him lined up in the backfield. We've seen him lined up at the slot. We've seen him lined up out wide, traditional tight end position. I think you can do so much with Kenyon Sadiq. And I think Kenyon Sadiq is going to be a more targeted weapon for this Oregon offense this season. The reason I grew up, I played tight end. I played defensive end. So you can certainly maybe hear my voice get a little bit more excited when I talk about a great tight end like Kenyon Sadiq. I think the reason that I love a great, versatile, athletic type of tight end, whether it's Terrance Ferguson, whether it's Kenyon Sadiq, whether it's someone that we're going to be talking about here in the future, because we know Tracktown USA has the speed on the boundary. We know we've got Evan Stewart. We know we've got Decorian Moore. We know we've got Jeremiah McLeod. We know we've got this speed. Oregon is always going to have the speed out on the perimeter. But when you look at the matchups in the middle of the field specifically, a lot of times it's finding the hole in the zone. You're matched up against a linebacker. Maybe you're matched up against a nickel. Maybe you're matched up against a safety. When you combine the speed, when you combine the size with someone like a Sadiq or some of these tight ends that are playing at Oregon, it is such a matchup mismatch. When you match up Sadiq, maybe he's from like a slot position against, if you match him up one-on-one against a linebacker, he's going to win it with his speed. You match him up in the red zone against a nickel or a safety, he's going to win that battle with his size. There always seems to be a little bit of a mismatch when you have a good, big, athletic tight end in the middle of the field. Now, we talk about the athleticism, we talk about the versatility of someone like Kenyon Sadiq, and he is going to get a lot of praise from me. He already has. But there's another guy on this room that maybe as we get closer to spring, maybe as we get closer to fall, might be a little bit overlooked in the grand scheme of things, and it's a transfer coming in from Louisville by the name of Jamari Johnson. 2023, coming out of high school, he was on the 24/7 All Freaks list. 6'5", 265 pounds, and this guy can move. This guy can move as well. I think maybe between the 20s, in the middle of the field on Oregon drives next season, you're going to look for the Kenyon Sadiqs of the world. You're going to look for, not of the world, you're going to look for Kenyon Sadiq, certainly himself. And I think he's going to be a top target amongst the DeCorian Moores, amongst the Evan Stewarts in this passing game for the Ducks next season. But I think when you get down to the red zone, I think when you get to someone like Jamari Johnson, like everybody's talking about a lot of weapons, the Super Frosh, Evan Stewart, Kenyon Sadiq, and I'm going to continue to talk about them. But I just have a feeling, I think sometime there's going to be situations, I think in 2025, where Oregon brings in a two tight end set. Maybe they throw Kenyon Sadiq in the slot, and then maybe Jamari Johnson is at the typical Y position next to the offensive tackle, and he's the guy they get the football to. Very similarly, like Kenyon Sadiq, and maybe some situations in 2024 with Terrance Ferguson on the field, certainly as well. That's the recent past. That's the present. But boy, the future is awfully spicy at this position. So you've got Ferguson. And then of course you've got Kenyon Sadiq and Jamari Johnson. If we do get just 1 year of Kenyon Sadiq, and I think we could very possibly see that if he has a really big year, he'd go out to the NFL. I think Jamari Johnson could create a bridge to these guys from the 25 class and the 2026 class as well. We start with 4-star Vander Ploeg. For the longest time, he was a commit to Washington, and he flipped over to the Oregon Ducks. Now, when you look at some of these guys that we've talked about with the height, with the size, with the Fergusons, with the Sadiqs, with the Jamari Johnson, Vander Ploeg, as of right now, maybe doesn't have that size that some of these other guys do. He's got the height, 6'6", but some people throwing him around 210 pounds, others maybe throw him at around 220 pounds. If he wants to play and really fit in to this role that Oregon tight ends have been able to fit into, I think he needs to spend a couple of years really working on his upper body and certainly gaining some weight. But then I kind of look at it, and considering some of the other guys on this list that in the 26 class, I think fit more into the traditional tight end role, maybe you could see Vander Ploeg really pivot to a big wide receiver type of role. Either way, I think Vander is going to find himself an opportunity to get on the field in the coming years for the Oregon Ducks. But I raved over Terrance Ferguson to start this thing. As maybe the best tight end in Oregon history. I think Kenyon Sadiq is going to take it to another level. But Kendre Harrison, he's currently committed to Oregon. And according to some recruiting folks out there, he's trying to get to Eugene as much as he possibly can. And he lives all the way on the other coast. He's all the way from North Carolina. But he's a top 15 player in the 24/7 Sports Composite. 6'7", 245 pounds. And not only is he good news for Dan Lanning in Eugene, he's good news for Dana Altman, because he is also an Oregon basketball commitment as well. When you have tight end also combined with being a great basketball player at that size, that's a guy that can go up and grab some rebounds. That's a guy that can go up and get the football in a red zone type of situations. 24/7 Sports called him a once-in-a-decade player at this type of position. His size, and man, this guy runs like a deer. Like, he is a weapon that I am so excited about once he eventually gets on campus. And then you look at some of these other 2026 tight ends as well. Like, you got the number one player that's already committed, and then you've got two players in the top 5 in the 26 class, according to 24/7 Sports, at the tight end position, that are big-time targets for the Oregon Ducks, and Oregon is contenders for both of these guys. I said in the show before, that was not the only time there was not just one time that I was going to be talking about the Mater Dei pipeline and connection. We got another one here in Mark Bowman. And then there are other connections with Brock Harris that is playing high school football within the state of Utah. He is a Portland native. Now, kind of like the quarterback situation that I laid out with Jared Curtis and Jonas Williams, I personally do not foresee both of these tight ends, being in this class in 2026. I just think, the schools that are going after these guys and the talents that both of these guys are, considering, you've already got Kendre Harrison committed in this class. I just don't see both of them coming. And I tend to favor Brock Harris, who is the number 5 tight end in this particular class. Mark Bowman is the number 2 tight end in this particular class. But if your consolation prize is that you sign the number 1 tight end and the number 5 tight end in a given class instead of number 1 and number 2, you're doing it right, and kids are flocking to the flock in Eugene more than ever at the tight end position. The tight end position is going to be an absolutely huge part of Oregon's offense in 2025. And now it's time to ask the question, will the 2025 Oregon offense be better than the 2024 offense? Now, I will say this as it pertains to the 2024 offense compared to that 2023 offense. 2024 took a little bit of a dip down. 2023, you saw a Ducks team led by Bo Nix, Troy Franklin, Bucky Irving. We all know the names that were in Eugene in that particular season. Second in scoring offense, second in total offense that year. In 2024, it dropped down. Number 17 in scoring offense and number 22 in total offense. Now, I think a reason for that, or at least maybe a partial reason for that, is what was going on at the quarterback position. Dillon Gabriel. Let's talk about him here for just a minute. I think he did all of the things that were asked of him. I think he did all of the things that were asked of him very, very well. When you become a Heisman finalist, you're playing good football. Certainly, you're doing what your coaches, what Will Stein is certainly asking of you. But when I looked at Dillon Gabriel leading this offense last year, it kind of felt at times they were playing a little bit of safe mode. Screen passes in the Big Ten championship game against Penn State, that's certainly one example. But that's a game you scored 45 freaking points. So what did I say in the last show? There's no crying on the yacht. These are good problems to have, certainly if you're an Oregon Duck fan right now. But I think it's clear, and I think we knew this going in with Dillon Gabriel, that he just didn't have the arm talent. He didn't have the big-time arm strength going down the field that was needed to maybe create some of those big explosive plays for the Oregon Ducks. But I got good news for Oregon fans as it pertains to this 2025 offense. You're going to have a guy at quarterback in Dante Moore that has the arm talent, that can make those explosive plays down the field. I think Dante provides more at quarterback, pun completely and obviously intended over there. And then when you look at what you have with the speed on the perimeter and guys to just be able to get over the top and beat their guy one-on-one, Evan Stewart and DeCorian Moore. Let's start first with Evan Stewart. I think Evan Stewart is really solidified as wide receiver 1. Whereas when you look at last year's offense, you look at Tez Johnson was in there, Trayshawn Holden was in there, and of course the aforementioned Evan Stewart. I think that together they provided really good options and they were a really good group. But I think Evan Stewart in 2025 is going to be a lot more, there it is again, it's going to be a lot more like 2023 Troy Franklin than really what they had at the wide receiver position in 2024. I think 7 is going to be the main target. I talked about how Kenyon Sadiq was going to be one of the main targets. I think Evan Stewart is going to be the guy that they're going to look to get the football to. His speed and his deep threat ability and just his ability to get open, combined with the arm strength of Dante Moore firing the football down the field, I think is going to be an equation that is going to be lethal. And then you got to look at the true freshman DeCorian Moore. I think DeCorian Moore is going to be put into a lot of really good situations, but the speed, the just flat-out track speed in Tracktown, USA, from both of those guys on the outside, they could obviously bump DeCorian Moore into the slot. They've run Evan Stewart certainly out of the slot as well, but I think those guys are going to be ultra difficult matchups. I think you're going to see a lot more downfield pass game because when you combine Dante Moore's increased arm talent as compared to Dillon Gabriel, and then the speed on the outside, I think you're going to see a lot of big chunks certainly down the field, more big chunks down the field from this Oregon offense in 2025 than you saw in 2024. I think overall, this offense is going to resemble a little bit more what you saw in 2023 than what you saw in 2024 as well. The middle of the field, I think, is going to be dominated by Kenyon Sadiq. When you talk about the speed that's on the outside, there's a lot of athleticism. There's a lot of matchup mismatches that could certainly occur against linebackers and against safeties with Kenyon in the middle of the field. And when you talk about those three weapons, and those are three really damn good weapons for Oregon, that might be as good as there is right now in college football. The number 3 wide receiver battle, assuming a Decorian Moore is the number 2, but the number 3 wide receiver battle going into spring and then eventually into fall camp of the regular season, there's no doubt about it. It is absolutely important. It's very imperative, and you'd like to see someone really step up big into that role. But considering what Sadiq, I think, is going to be in this offense and how good of a weapon he is in the middle of the field, considering those two that I just talked about, I think that this is going to be more of a rotation once you get beyond those three. The McClellans, the Dickies, the Gary Bryant Jr.'s, the Kyler Caspers, guys like that. I think you're going to see more bodies on the field at wide receiver for the Oregon Ducks in 2025. Let's move into the interior, and this is where I really like talking about this because this is where things get balanced, and maybe this is where some of Ted's takes get a little bit spicy, one might say. I think this offensive line is going to continue the elite standard back-to-back Joe Moore Award finalists. I think you're going to see more of that. Now, it's crazy. Hey, you lose 2 great offensive tackles. You lose Josh Connerly and Ajani Cornelius, Struther, at guard. Like, you lose a good amount of starters on this offensive line. But I look at specifically the transfer additions. There are 2 really good to great to maybe elite level additions in Emmanuel Pranon from USC at guard, and then Isaiah World is just getting higher ratings and higher feedback the more time that really goes on. Like, did I hear that he was the top player overall, maybe in the transfer portal? Certainly the top offensive lineman over there at tackle. Could he be a first-round draft pick? Could it be a second-round draft pick? Like, there's a lot of hype right now. I think it was On 3 or 24/7 Sports rated Isaiah World as the top impact transfer over Dylan Thieneman for the Oregon Ducks. And that's certainly saying something from the offensive tackle position as compared to the safety position as well. But for me, like a potential left side of this offensive line of Isaiah World and Emmanuel Pranon, and then, of course, Iapane Lalaolu Pancho in at center, that's a group of some big boys. That's a group of some guys that can move some people around. And you got Matthew Bedford possibly coming in at guard, Alex Harkey, maybe Janoris Wilson, maybe somebody else. Certainly over there at the other tackle spot. So I think the standards is going to remain the same. I think these are going to be comparable offensive lines that you saw from 2024 to 2025, just with different pieces in different places. And I think this offensive line is going to get downhill, and they're going to get downhill a lot, and you're going to have this offense be extremely balanced, which leads me to the run game. I think there's a possibility. There might be even a probability that this might be the best run game of the Dan Lanning era, and I have talked about that in a previous edition of TSOW. I think the combination with what you have on the offensive line, specifically the interior, with Iapane Lalaolu really solidifying his spot as the captain and the anchor of this offensive line at center, I think this is going to be one of the best run games in college football. When you throw in Mekhi Hughes and when you throw in Noah Whittington as that great 1B option certainly as well. I think when you look at past running backs, when you look at Bucky Irving, when you look at Jordan James, like these were really good running backs. Like look at what Bucky Irving has done in his rookie year in the National Football League. I mean, look at Jordan James, who had the highest output rushing yards for an Oregon running back in the Dan Lanning era. They keep on taking steps up the ladder. You keep on getting best evers in this Dan Lanning program right now, leading Oregon. But I look at Mekhi Hughes. I combine him with this offensive line. Here's a spicy take. You ready for a spicy take? I'm not ready to really put my name and signature on it quite yet. quite yet, but maybe I've got the pen in my hand to write the signature. A lot of people have said, end of the season next year, hey, maybe Dante Moore could be on that stage in New York City. Maybe he could be a Heisman finalist. He's got that talent to be that guy next season. Don't sleep on Mekhi Hughes being that guy. I love what they have, being able to bully people on the O-line. I think he's going to remain fresh with someone like Noah Whittington in that 1B type of role. He's great at contact. It's really hard to bring him down. I think there's a possibility that he could have the best season. If he puts up the same numbers that he did at Tulane, he's going to be running behind a better offensive line at Oregon than he did at Tulane. If he puts up similar numbers than he did at Tulane, then he is going to have the best season of an Oregon running back in the Dan Lanning era. I think this offense is going to be so balanced, and it's going to be the ultimate pick your poison offense. A big part of that is the talent of Mekhi Hughes in the backfield and balancing it with the talent of Dante Moore and all around this group. I can't find a weakness. There's great players all over the place, and folks, I can't wait to watch them play ball in 2025. We keep on rolling down the pike here on That Show Out West, and we keep on breaking down some really good and really engaging Oregon Duck topics. Make sure you engage in the comments below. Hey, do you think that the Oregon offense is going to be better in 2025 than 2024? Do you agree with me that this tight end room is going to remain stacked? Who do you think, of all the tight ends that I mentioned, who do you think is going to be the best tight end when all is said and done for all of these guys from 2025 to 2026 and beyond? Leave all of those thoughts in the comments below. I'm Ted LaBrue. This has been That Show Out West.